focus, years of Islamic State rule in much of Syria and Iraq have come to an end. The withdrawal this week of ISIS from its last stronghold in Syria, the town of Abu Kamal, marks the virtual collapse of the caliphate. Militants still control scattered pockets of Syria, but the last major built-up area held by the extremists has now been liberated. The damage that's been left behind in previously held ISIS strongholds is stunning. This is new drone video of the destruction in Mosul, Iraq. The city was once home to hundreds of thousands of people, but now following the Islamic State siege and the battle to retake the city, Iraqis believe that rebuilding Mosul could last a decade. Meanwhile, the battle for control of many towns continues. Syrian troops backed by Iran and Russia are increasingly facing off with their rival, the U.S.-backed Kurdish forces. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces control some of Syria's largest oil fields, which the Syrian government intends to try and take back. Joining us now is Matthew RJ Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Security Studies Group. Matthew, this vacuum that's been created with the caliphate essentially disappearing, you've got U.S.-backed Kurdish forces on one side, you've got the Iranian-backed and Syrian forces on the other. How does this shake out?
It's hard for me to see the way that the Kurds are going to hang on to a lot of the territory in Syria. We've already seen the precedent in Iraq as to what happens in Kirkuk. The United States didn't seem to stand by their Kurdish allies there. So it's hard to imagine that that would be the case in Syria, unfortunately. I think right here where you have the final battle around Abu Kamal, that's one of three main land routes into Syria that Iran would use for transferring weapons to Hezbollah, and it would be a great way to transfer their equipment. They have through the north is one path that goes through Kurdish territory. They're probably not going to use that, but this one here is really prime, and it's where the major oil fields are located in Syria. So I think Assad is going to essentially end up taking it back. There's little that I've seen from the United States that says that they're going to stand up, and there are reports that the United States and Russia were coming up with some major deal that perhaps might be partition, but it's hard to see it being very advantageous to the United States.
So in other words, the Kurds who did the heavy fighting on the ground against Islamic State, both in parts of Iraq and Syria, now that they want to try to essentially control parts of these territory, the United States is looking the other way.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I really hope that I'm wrong, but there's very little that indicates otherwise. The U.S. doesn't seem to have had a plan as far as how it was going to deal with Iran and Syria, or how it was going to deal with Iran basically on the ground throughout the region, aside and separate from the nuclear arrangement. So when you see that the U.S. was okay with the ceasefire zones, obviously the one in the south was really bad from Israel's perspective. And again, you see an Iranian base. Now there are reports south of Damascus. These are all very worrying signs, and it doesn't seem that the United States has really taken that into account. So I guess I would say I'd be shocked if suddenly we're going to make a stand with Kurdish allies.
And yet Iran's influence is one of the reasons why the Trump administration has suggested that perhaps it should not recertify the nuclear deal. And yet that influence now continues to grow by Iran, because I guess if you look at a map, there's now essentially a Shiite crescent starting in Iran, going through Iraq, going through Syria, all the way to Lebanon.
Absolutely. Now, they could argue that they don't really need the land route anyways, and it's true. You can go online. There are programs where you can track the air traffic that's going from Tehran's airport to Damascus, and you can actually see the cargo planes, and if you match it up with Twitter feeds, you'll sometimes see fighters being transported there. So you know that they're coming into Damascus, and so basically they might not need the border to transfer a lot. But the knowing that there's a base south of Iran, and then of course that there have been missile facilities, manufacturing facilities, these are all very worrying. And I don't know what the United States has negotiated with Russia vis-a-vis Iran. I mean, and this again predates Trump. This was under Obama administration in 2015 was when Russia got in there. But Russia has a really big hand that they can play right now, and there's a lot that they want from the United States in return.
Is part of this because the United States, other than defeating Islamic State, really has decided not to, I don't know, stay involved in the Middle East? I mean, again, as you point out, Iran, which is an ally of Russia, Russia and Iran now essentially have incredible control over vast areas of the Middle East that are connected to the north and to the east of Israel.
Right. I think there's two problems here. It's a contradiction in itself. There's the desire to do a whole lot more than was ever done before. And so that was, those were promises made during the campaign, but to do so with far less than anyone has done before. It takes troops and it takes equipment, it takes time and it takes money to push back on Iran. Now, there's many people that back Trump that don't want to see the United States more involved in the Middle East. Well, if you're not going to be involved in the Middle East and you're going to just do it from afar and you're not willing to stand by allies that work with you, then you're not going to pick up the gains in the end. So it's a catch-22 that really I'm hoping that after these, I would classify them as mistakes, that he would look at that and realize, okay, we actually have to do more and we need to do more to push back on Iran, and to figure out that really when you push back on Iran on the ground, that gives you a better seat and a better hand to negotiate later on. Everyone else in the region knows that. The United States, from the Obama administration until now, hasn't seemed to have figured that part out yet.
Matthew, RJ Brodsky, Senior Fellow at the Security Studies Group. Matthew, thanks for doing this. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now look beyond stateside in our global roundup. In Russia, the explosion that caused the collapse of an apartment building was caught on a dashboard camera there on the left. The blast killed at least 6 people. Officials say 32 apartments were destroyed. Investigators believe a natural gas leak caused the explosion. In Iraq, millions of Shiite Muslims gathered Friday in the holy city of Karbala. They participated in the annual pilgrimage of Arba'in, which marks the end of a 40-day mourning period. In the past, the event has been a target for Sunni extremist groups like Islamic State. Authorities implemented tight security measures along the 50-mile procession route from Baghdad to the holy city. In New Delhi,